Mr. Scrooge's Christmas. In a busy town where snowflakes danced through the December air like tiny white butterflies, there stood a dark, narrow shop with frost-covered windows and a creaky wooden sign that read, Scrooge and Company Toys. But if you peeked through those foggy windows, you wouldn't see many toys at all. Instead, you'd see shelves lined with dusty account books, a small iron stove that was never quite warm enough, and an old badger named Cornelius Scrooge hunched over his desk, counting coins with long, careful claws. Mr. Scrooge was the kind of person who believed that Christmas was nothing more than an expensive nuisance, a day when people wasted perfectly good money on unnecessary things like presents and feasts and decorations. He would grumble about every penny spent, scowl at every Christmas carol sung outside his shop, and refuse to give his young assistant, Timothy Mouse, even a single extra lump of coal for the tiny stove that barely kept the shop from freezing. Mr. Scrooge hadn't always been this way, though most people in town had forgotten that. Long ago, when he was just a young badger with bright eyes and a quick smile, Cornelius had loved Christmas more than any other day of the year. He had worked in his father's toy shop back then, and every December he would stay up late into the night helping craft beautiful wooden trains, soft teddy bears with button eyes, and delicate dolls with painted smiles. He loved seeing children's faces light up when they pressed their noses against the shop window, pointing at the toys they hoped to find under their Christmas trees. But then difficult times had come to the town, and his father's shop had struggled. One particularly harsh winter, they'd had to close their doors forever, and his father had passed away shortly after, his heart broken by the loss of the shop he'd poured his life into. Young Cornelius had blamed Christmas for it all. The expensive decorations they'd bought to attract customers, the toys they'd sold at reduced prices to make children happy, the generous spirit that had left them with empty pockets when they needed money most. From that day forward, Cornelius Scrooge had hardened his heart like ice freezing over a pond. He reopened the toy shop, but he ran it differently than his father had. He bought toys cheaply and sold them dearly, never offering discounts or smiling at customers. He kept the shop cold to save on heating costs, paid his assistant Timothy as little as possible, and refused every invitation to Christmas celebrations. When the town's children would press their faces against his window now, he would rap sharply on the glass and shoo them away, muttering about fingerprints and wasted time. The other shopkeepers on the street would shake their heads sadly when they saw him, remembering the cheerful young badger he used to be and wondering what had happened to turn him into such a cold, lonely creature. On this particular Christmas Eve, the snow was falling thick and fast, covering the cobblestone streets in a pristine white blanket that muffled the sounds of the bustling town. Inside the shop, Timothy Mouse sat at his small desk near the window, trying to warm his tiny paws by breathing on them while he carefully wrote out receipts in his neatest handwriting. Timothy was a gentle soul with soft gray fur, oversized spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, and a green scarf his mother had knitted him that he wore even indoors because the shop was so dreadfully cold. Despite working for the grumpiest badger in town, Timothy never complained. He always arrived early, worked diligently, and tried to see the good in Mr. Scrooge, even when it was very difficult to find. His mother often told him that everyone had goodness inside them, even if it was buried deep, and Timothy believed her with all his heart. "Mr. Scrooge, sir," Timothy said softly, his breath forming little clouds in the cold air, "it's nearly 6 o'clock. Might I be excused to go home to my family? My little sister Emma is only 3, and she's been so excited about Christmas Eve. She wants me to help her hang our stocking by the fireplace." His voice was hopeful but tentative, like someone asking for a favor they know might be denied. He twisted his small paws together nervously, his spectacles reflecting the dim light from the single candle that lit the shop. Mr. Scrooge looked up from his ledger, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in a fierce frown that made his whole face look like a thundercloud. "Christmas Eve. Christmas Day. Bah," he growled, his deep voice rumbling through the cold shop like distant thunder. "Every year it's the same nonsense. People spending money they don't have on things nobody needs, all for one ridiculous day of the year. And you want to leave early when there's work to be done? I suppose you'll expect to be paid for tomorrow even though the shop is closed." His words were sharp and cutting, designed to make Timothy feel guilty for even asking. Timothy's shoulders slumped a little, But he gathered his courage and spoke again, his voice even quieter than before. "It's only once a year, sir. And my family, we don't have much, but we do love to spend Christmas together. My mother makes a small plum pudding and we sing carols, and little Emma believes that Father Christmas brings joy to every home, even the humblest ones. She's been practicing a song to sing for us all week." He paused, then added with the kind of pure honesty that only good-hearted people possess, "I know you think Christmas is foolish, Mr. Scrooge, but to some of us, it's the one day when everything feels magical and full of hope." For just a moment, something flickered across Mr. Scrooge's face, a memory perhaps, or a feeling he'd buried long ago. But then his expression hardened again, and he waved his paw dismissively toward the door. Fine, go then. But be here extra early the day after Christmas, do you hear? Someone has to make up for all this wasted time and sentiment." Timothy grabbed his worn coat and thin scarf, nodded gratefully, and scurried out into the snowy evening, leaving Mr. Scrooge alone in the cold, dark shop with nothing but his coins and his account books for company. As the evening grew darker and the snow continued to fall, Mr. Scrooge locked up his shop and trudged through the empty streets toward his small, sparse apartment above a closed bakery. The town was transformed by Christmas. Every window glowed with warm candlelight, every door bore a wreath of holly and pine, and the sound of laughter and singing drifted through the air like the most beautiful music. But Mr. Scrooge saw none of the beauty. He only saw waste and foolishness, money spent on temporary joy, people forgetting to be practical and sensible. He climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment, lit a single small candle to save oil, and sat down in his worn armchair with a piece of dry bread and hard cheese for his dinner, refusing to spend extra on a proper Christmas meal. But sleep did not come easily to Mr. Scrooge that night. As he lay in his narrow bed, wrapped in thin blankets that never seemed quite warm enough, he found himself thinking about things he usually pushed away, memories of his father's gentle laugh, the smell of fresh-cut pine from the Christmas trees they used to sell, the weight of his mother's hand on his shoulder as they arranged toys in the window, the sound of children's delighted gasps when they found exactly what they'd hoped for. He thought about Timothy's little sister Emma, only 3 years old, practicing her song all week for her family. He thought about how Timothy never complained even though the shop was freezing and the pay was meager. And slowly, very slowly, something inside Mr. Scrooge's frozen heart began to crack, just a little, like ice beginning to thaw when spring finally arrives. He rose from his bed and walked to the small window, looking out over the snowy town. Below, he could see families walking home from church services, children pulling sleds, neighbors calling out cheerful greetings to one another. And in that moment, Mr. Scrooge remembered something his father had told him long ago, words he'd forgotten for many years. "Cornelius, my boy, the greatest wealth isn't measured in coins. It's measured in the love we share and the joy we bring to others. A toymaker's true profit is a child's smile, and that's worth more than all the gold in the world." His father had said those words in the toy shop, surrounded by wooden trains and stuffed bears, his eyes twinkling with the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're doing something meaningful with your life. Tears began to roll down Mr. Scrooge's furry cheeks, leaving wet tracks that glinted in the moonlight streaming through his window. He realized with sudden, painful clarity what he had become, a bitter, lonely creature who had let one tragedy turn him away from everything beautiful in life. He had blamed Christmas for his losses, but Christmas hadn't caused them. Difficult times had caused them, and instead of holding on to the love and joy his father had taught him, he had locked his heart away and convinced himself that caring about nothing was safer than caring about anything. He had spent years pushing people away, refusing kindness, hoarding money that brought him no happiness, and missing out on the very things that make life worth living: connection, generosity, warmth, and love. "What have I done?" he whispered into the quiet darkness of his room, his voice breaking with emotion. "What have I become?" He thought about all the Christmases he'd wasted being angry and alone, all the times he'd refused to help others or join in celebrations, all the years he'd made poor Timothy work in a freezing shop for barely enough pay to support his family. He thought about his father, who would be so disappointed to see what his son had become, and his mother, who had taught him that kindness was never wasted even when times were hard. The weight of all those lonely, bitter years pressed down on him like a heavy stone, and he sank to his knees beside his window, overcome with regret and sorrow for the time he'd lost and the hurt he'd caused. But then, as the church bells began to chime midnight, announcing the arrival of Christmas Day, something remarkable happened. Mr. Scrooge felt that crack in his heart grow wider and wider, and suddenly, like a dam breaking, all the warmth and love he'd locked away came flooding back. He remembered how good it felt to make children happy, how satisfying it was to craft something beautiful with his own paws, how wonderful it was to be part of a community that cared for one another. He remembered the true spirit of Christmas that his father had embodied, not the expensive gifts or elaborate decorations, but the generosity, the kindness, the way people reached out to one another and made the dark winter brighter with their love and care. Timothy became more than just his assistant. He became his friend and eventually his partner in the toy business. Together, they transformed Scrooge and Company into the most beloved toy shop in town, a place where children were always welcome to look and dream, where families could find affordable gifts, and where the spirit of giving lived year-round, not just at Christmas. Mr. Scrooge even started a tradition of setting aside a portion of their profits to provide toys for children whose families couldn't afford them, making sure that every child in town had something special on Christmas morning. It was exactly what his father would have wanted, and every time Mr. Scrooge helped a child choose a toy, he felt his father's presence, as if the old toymaker was smiling down from heaven, proud that his son had finally remembered the lessons he'd been taught so long ago. Years passed, and Mr. Scrooge's reputation completely changed. People no longer spoke of him as the mean, miserly badger who hated Christmas. Instead, he became known as the kindest, most generous person in town, someone who embodied the true spirit of the season every single day. Children adored him and would run up to hug him when they saw him on the street. Adults respected him and sought his advice on matters both business and personal. And every Christmas Eve, he would close the shop early and join Timothy's family for dinner, watching little Emma, who grew taller each year but never lost her love of singing, perform with her school's Christmas choir. He had a special chair at their table, and they called him Uncle Cornelius, and he couldn't imagine anything that could possibly make him happier. On one particularly snowy Christmas Eve, many years after his great change of heart, an elderly Mr. Scrooge sat in his shop with Timothy, now a middle-aged mouse with children of his own, and they were wrapping toys for the next day's Christmas charity drive. A young rabbit came into the shop, looking nervous and uncertain, and approached the counter. "Excuse me, sir," the rabbit said quietly, "I'm new to town, and I'm trying to start a business, but times are hard and I'm struggling. Everyone told me that Mr. Scrooge might have some advice. They said you understand what it's like to go through difficult times." Mr. Scrooge looked at the young rabbit and saw himself from so many years ago, scared, uncertain, facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. He smiled warmly and invited the rabbit to sit down. "I do understand difficult times, my young friend," he said gently, his voice full of hard-won wisdom. "I understand them very well indeed. And I can tell you the most important lesson I've ever learned. When times are hardest, that's when we need kindness and generosity most, both giving it and receiving it. Don't let struggles turn your heart cold like I did. Don't shut people out or convince yourself that caring is weakness. The only thing that got me through my hardest times, even though I didn't realize it for many years, was the love that people around me kept offering even when I refused to accept it." He paused, looking around his warm, cheerful shop full of toys that would bring joy to children the next morning, and then continued, "Money comes and goes, businesses succeed and fail, but the connections we make with others, the kindness we show, the help we offer, the love we share, those things last forever. They're what make us rich in the ways that truly matter. My father taught me that when I was young, but I forgot it for a long time. Don't make the same mistake I did. Stay open-hearted, ask for help when you need it, offer help when you can, and remember that we're all in this together. That's the real meaning of Christmas, and it's the secret to a life well lived." The young rabbit's eyes filled with tears of gratitude, and Mr. Scrooge offered practical help too, advice on business, introductions to other shopkeepers, and an interest-free loan to help get the young entrepreneur started. As the rabbit left, promising to pay forward the kindness he'd received, Timothy smiled at his old friend and said, "You know, Mr. Scrooge, you've helped so many people over the years. You've changed so many lives. Your father would be incredibly proud of the badger you've become." Mr. Scrooge felt his eyes grow misty, and he nodded slowly. "I wasted so many years being angry and afraid, Timothy. So many Christmases I spent alone and bitter when I could have been surrounded by love and joy. But I'm grateful for every day I've had since that Christmas Eve when I finally remembered who I was meant to be. I can't get back the time I lost, but I can make sure I use every day I have left to spread the kindness and generosity my father taught me. That's my purpose now, and it brings me more happiness than all the money I used to count so carefully ever could." That night, as Mr. Scrooge walked home through the snow-covered streets, listening to Christmas carols drifting from warm houses and seeing families gathered together through glowing windows, he felt completely at peace. He had learned the hardest and most important lesson of his life, that an open heart is never truly vulnerable. It's strong, resilient, and capable of creating magic in the world. He had learned that Christmas wasn't about expensive gifts or elaborate celebrations. It was about connection, compassion, and remembering that every person we meet is carrying their own struggles and deserves our kindness. He had learned that it's never too late to change, never too late to choose love over fear, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And so Mr. Cornelius Scrooge, once the coldest, most miserable creature in town, became its warmest, most beloved citizen, a living reminder that transformation is always possible, that hearts frozen by hurt and fear can thaw and bloom again, and that the true spirit of Christmas isn't found in what we receive but in what we give, not in what we keep for ourselves but in what we share with others, and not in perfection but in the genuine effort to be better, kinder, and more loving with each passing day.